My mother always told me that day would come. The day my body failed. I only wish she wasn't there to witness it. Yet she was the one to shove my funeral boat away from the moon-cast sands. I could see it all unfold. Her face was difficult to make out, as were the faces of everyone else I was leaving behind. Perhaps it was to put me at ease, but it didn't make it any less heart-wrenching. Everything ached, not just my heart. My ribs felt brittle and broken, my legs cramped and crackled. The very veins in my arms burned a terrible itch, a sign that I wasn't ready for the long, long journey ahead of me. One rarely is, I suppose. Ever closer, my boat drifted toward the edge of the world I knew. Instead of gazing forward at the endless ocean of galaxies, my eyes lingered on the home I was leaving. Bonfires of my neighbors flaring brighter than ever, humble peaks peering over lines of towering arbors. Flickering streams glowed with water clearer than any of the crystals growing like wildflowers at their banks. I wanted to hate the whistling grass and the wind that was either too warm or too cold. To despise the colorful flora and fauna would have made it so much easier to put behind. Why did my home have to look so cozy when I left it? Drifting over the edge, the winds of the cosmos carried me away. Gentle, warm. Whispers in the depths of my thoughts called to me. Dreams of things I never experienced, echoing, alluring. Following my elders' advice, I succumbed to slumber so that I might start my sojourn proper, with stories that would shape my own people someday. The bones and blood I was blessed with were not strong, but I could make up for it with spirit. My old life ended that day, but a new one was gifted to me, just like the universe bestowed to the rest of my kin. That was, and always will be, the destiny of giants. My first dream came fast. I awoke in a land far smaller and far brighter than my own. One where sunshine bakes unsheltered skin and roasts uncovered feet. A man stood over me, with malice at first, then a smile. Perhaps he misjudged who I was. Relieved, he offered a hand, one I gladly accepted. He took me with him to his caravan. Wondrous line of people atop large carted creatures. Creatures bigger than myself. He introduced himself as Ain, and the long, lanky reptile his hut rode upon was named Munch. Ain showed me a hand fashioned of wood and wire, claiming he had to replace it after Munch nibbled on it. I was shocked, but he laughed and laughed, and I found myself laughing with him at the time-worn joke. His laughter helped me forget the life I left behind, and from then on, I couldn't remember anything outside of the dream. I was born anew, and Ain would be my first friend in this exotic place. He clothed my back, filled my stomach, and bedded my head with what little he had. He was a merchant who sought, sold, traded, and traveled. A man of the many dunes and dips of the red cliffs his world boasted. His dream was to strike it rich, and to share his riches with the love of his life, whenever he found them. A sincere wish, one I found to want as well. To live serenely in the oasis towers. That is why he joins caravans with Munch, and that is when our friendship was sealed with honest words and a handshake. My body was still feeble, but my mind was sharp. Though Ain was a merchant for far longer than I, the trade came easy. Coin and stock were simple. The when and where and how much and how little consumed my waking moments. He was frustrated with how quickly I caught on, but he was far more suited for bartering than me. Something I never entirely got. Sometimes he'd sell something for hardly anything at all, only to make a bounty on something in excess the next day. Together, we grew our names around the Ialti Oasis Tower. We stayed only for 2.5 moons. Ain said we shouldn't get comfortable in one place. He and I, and Munch, left for better horizons. I'll admit, sometimes those dreams in the distance were nothing but empty stomachs and dreary days. Our only salvation were Ain's tall tales and Munch's simple smile. Somehow we pushed through the sandstorms and starless nights. Together we grew our coffers, spread our names, and eventually came to lead our own caravan. A whole crew of workers and beasts of burden. For many years, life was simple. Life was good. Halfway through a visit to the Oalto Tower, that was when the good times came to an end. Ain claimed to have found the love of his life, the maiden of his dreams. But her noble father wouldn't let him near her. He needed to be important enough in the eyes of the local hierarchy. That's when he decided to leave the caravan. I thought he was joking at first. His obsession wouldn't last, like many before. But this time he was adamant. We broke out into argument. Harsh words were thrown. And I finally asked if she was more important than our friendship. He said it was. My heart tore at that moment. But the financials were mostly within my power. I remember well that I could have trickled our combined savings into my own pockets, paint him as a fool and a fraud, and leave him behind to chase his futile love. And why shouldn't I? My only friend that wanted to leave me on a whim. Instead, I gave him most of my share, telling him it would make his trials up the steps of nobility easier. I left before he could thank me, taking the rest of the caravan and Munch with me before dawn. Life became lonelier than ever. Days felt hotter, nights chill, and the crew suffered for it. Many of the best left, and I just couldn't be the salesman that Ain was. Years passed before I even dared go back to Oalto, fearing either Ain achieved his dream, or worse, failed. 2 days after settling the beasts, an old friend visited me with a fine lady at his side, and a lively child. Ain hugged me with a sparkling new hand and tears on his cheeks. My dream began to fade then. Not long after the caravan departed on the next journey, I found myself smiling at the stars, eyesight fading, with peace in my heart, knowing that instead of collecting in my pocket, my riches helped a friend. Dreams harbored and sailed, morphing my mind, slowly cementing my morals. These trials and tribulations would eventually birth my own people. In every one, I would forget all about my previous lives, so that I may live anew. After the bittersweet sands of Ain's camaraderie, more lives than I can count went by until another profound one chanced upon me. I awoke peacefully, in a bed by some wrecked, mountainous seashore. The sky in this world was gray, and clouded with streams of toxic winds. Sands were black, waters churned with eerie pigments. But despite the lack of color, life blossomed as it always does. In the forms of massive fish, cavernous corals, swooping seafowl, and people doomed to live their days in desperation. The life I got began harsh, but just, and work became my mantra. Fine drink was rare, but the cheery cries of my good fellows quenched thirst better than any spirits. They utilized machines, or what few they allowed themselves to keep from their past, to clean their oceans and unsalt what little land they could. Magics still lingered in the world, but few could channel them, and fewer still to use them wisely. My body, still wrecked and rottened, hardened, tailored and sharpened to a form satisfactory. It was necessary, for trips across the wrathful seas and storm-wrought cliffs bore struggle, more than any life before. Good friends came as often as they were taken. Many good friends. Merry be the remaining, a common saying was. On a rare day, when the bronze sun shone, we docked amidst 1,000 ships in the port of Valhutora, a mountainous city in itself, surrounded by taller earthen kin. It was there I ran into a troubled beauty escaping from her duties, Siofi. She tripped, and I decided to lend a hand, not knowing how much she would mean to me. A happening chance at first soon became 2, then 3, then more. I enthralled her with stories, just as she blessed me with her company. It was not just her eyes that snagged my heart, but her voice and ears. She listened as often as she spoke fair words, a bright mind and brighter soul. I left the city feeling downtrodden, and eager for my next visit. Hopping between treks to scout new islands and dredging the seas of ancient debris, I returned to Valhutora as often as the stale winds allowed for it. Siofi would be there, lingering around the docks, much to her parents' disappointment. Later she told me of the importance her lineage held amidst the archaic customs and arcane culture, but it didn't matter. Not to us. Despite my aching body being broken and remolded by the dream, as long as Siofi was by my side, all was right. Eventually, she left the city, running away with me like some old children's tale, sneaking aboard my next ship as another deckhand. Unlike me, she proved herself more useful in delicate matters, navigating the entropic currents with some power beyond my understanding. The two of us made an excellent team, a duo of heart and voice that steered us towards more adventurous routes. Scouting eldritch dig sites, scouring elevated temples, sailing through scolding straits. We did it together, and we relished it. A particular task drove a splinter in my happiness. Our sporadic attitudes led us to take more reckless opportunities. We took a job to explore the remains of an old one's city deep beneath the scorched crust and blackened waves. Only we accepted, undeterred by the legends surrounding it. A harrowing journey followed, dodging dangers, sneaking amidst subterranean prowlers, and avoiding more traps than either of us should have reasonably survived. It was near the end of that adventure that I nearly lost her. We unleashed some sort of primordial force, and Siofi went unconscious. While I cradled her in my arms, the being spoke to me, claiming that my love, with her lineage and legacy, held the key within her to cleanse the world of anguish. But it would likely cost her her life. Only a chance. A chance to save the world. A chance to change fate for the betterment of everyone. A chance to lose the love that sang songs to my heart. All I needed was to let go. But I couldn't. The being showed fear. They could not leave their prison, so they called out, pleading, reasoning. They'd ensure Siofi would be safe, even if it cost them their existence. But I couldn't. The price of salvation is always high, but this was a price that I could not pay. I would not pay. Escaping with Siofi in my arms, she eventually woke and asked me what had transpired. I lied, saying it was a dead end, a waste. After resting, we made way to the surface, where the cold nights were colder, even with her at my side. That dream began to unravel then, just as my heart did. A turmoil so deep, not even her smile could mend. At least, the last moments in that life were with her. That alone was worth a world. Many more visions flew by. But it was one of the last dreams of my slumber that leapt out. One where I didn't even stand on two legs, where I was nothing more than a beast. But oh, the beast I was. Grander than any other being, I stood tall amongst wild kin. Claws of contempt paired with horns of vigor, only outmatched by a gentle soul. I was mighty. For once in my existence, my body was strong, and everyone knew it. The village built around my shrine home spanned far through verdant wildlands. Though primitive, the citizens were honest and kind, tending the forest until branches soared higher than even the birds. Singing to the land, the earth itself rose at their whim, blessing them with waterfalls and wellsprings. And their offerings were so delectable. Only the best cuts of meat and sweetest berries for their guardian. Each night their prayers would whisper to me in the wind, and every day I'd answer them by staying vigilant. Though a fierce predator, one prey did manage to stump me. Time. Time was a fleeting critter. No matter how I gnashed, its airy wisps always slipped through my teeth. Seasons swept by with the birth and death of moons soaring across the ringed sky. Children would come to me and play with my tail and whisper jokes in an attempt to make me laugh. The next day they'd be rough and rowdy, nearly come of age. A blink and a blur, and they have had their own children. In the time it took for me to take a nap, they would grow sagely, coming to me on occasion to remember good days as they watched their grandchildren clamber the mossy rocks. And time would keep me the same, and though grateful I was that my people would always have me, a deep sadness would always caress my heart each time I woke up to forlorn faces and a fresh wound on their spirits. Life went on, and on, and on. Sometimes I would leave to run through nature's domain, my domain. To feel the sodden soil and breathe scented winds was the remedy to many ailments. But the illness they could not cure was the greed of mortals. Coming home one day, I was met with a curious council of foreigners. They spoke my kin's words and wore not their clothes, but they honored nature enough to convene in peace. They came from a faraway land, one they hoped to leave its ruinous cadaver behind and start anew. Under my watchful gaze, my kin offered to house them until they could move on, but were told to find a different home, as this was one that they cultivated themselves. The foreigners agreed, and life went on as usual. Nights came and went in silence, until haunting voices awoke me from slumber. Silent screams of my kin being slaughtered as they bravely defended their home. They prayed to me, pleading, desperate for aid. But the winds and roots of my home told me more than their anguished cries. The strangers were untrustworthy, but their people lingered around the edge of the wilds, exhausted, hungry, waiting with families for a better life that would not come. Visions of my kin's scouts flickered across my eyes. They knew. They whispered. They conspired, planning to leave me asleep while a team went out and slaughtered the strangers while they dreamt. A wickedness I've never seen awoken in my children. I cried that night, a river of starlight as I searched through my domain, silencing the black-hearted amongst the strangers, and those I thought of as my family. Only the children and those I knew to be kind and true survived. A feasting for the fungus, a banquet for the worms. Both sides begged me for mercy in their souls, resonating within my maw. They should know their own sayings better than I, who neither wrote nor read. Mercy is reserved for the merciful. That night ended with sullen screams, a golden hue basking the survivors with clarity. Those left on both sides with kind hearts were welcome, and those who were not fled from my deafness on pity. That dream ended while my new kin rebuilt, and those that didn't follow my law felt my wrath, my sadness. They feared me, and I relished it with bitterness. With all my dreams complete, it was time to wake up. Stars surrounded me. Odd ones I've never seen before in strange, unnamed constellations. Memories flooded back in a single gargantuan wave. I could not move, but I could see. I was relieved to see my body whole. My fragileness only hampered the mountains a bit. They were not the tallest, but they were complete, rising and falling with cavernous valleys and spanning ravines. Many oceans covered my surface, ones both pleasantly shallow and deep with turmoil. Often they'd mix with no rhyme or reason, leaving me to wonder how low the trenches crept, or how the waves would dance over the reefs. Abundant archipelagos were sprinkled across the seas and sands with solitary mountains, chains of volcanic spews, or arches of lush jungles. But my favorite places were my lungs. Wide open fields of grassy knolls, sand-swept cliffs, calm groves, and interwoven riverlands, blessed with breath and clean skies. No matter how I dreamt during my slumber, I was at least glad of the world I became. Life soon blossomed above the creatures of the dirt. Fish grew fat from the cardinal currents of their oceanic home. Avians soared in massive flocks above the open lands. Artists of the hunt cried out their talent, claiming territory through silent strife. To my surprise, some of these beasts grew massive in size, though they were still fragile in stature. Lean, cunning, and mostly peaceful, they were everything I could have hoped for. Hundreds of comets soared over my skies when my first people came into being. They were small, much like myself back home, but what they lacked in strength, they made up for with passion. They'd live in large communities, building structures in tandem with the land to help keep them out of sight. It wasn't long before they crafted fine tools and finer feasts. Under the light of the cosmos, they'd sing stories about their history, sagas surrounding the stars, spinning myths about lands beyond the horizons. I did my best to give them good weather, but even when sickness befell me, or a cold chill would waft o'er my skin, they'd endure. Right now, everything is as it should be. All my children are healthy and happy, as am I. If any of my original giant kin come to visit, whether it be sailing across the solar winds to keep watch, or perhaps in their own dreams when the time came to take their journey, they can learn something from my world. And maybe someone can let Mother know that I still miss her, and that I'm doing all right.